tribal nation. Here she is. Give her a big round of applause.
It was 400 years. In 1524, Giovanni di Verrazzano, a Florentine explorer of North America in the service of the King of France, encountered the Lenape people living on what's now called the Delaware River. In 1924, 400 years later, the American Indians became citizens of America. Some indigenous people had already become citizens, either by participating in the armed forces or giving up their tribal affiliations or assimilating into mainstream American religion and life. But this act was not retroactive. We were not citizens if we were born before 1924. And this did not change until the passage of the Nationality Act of 1940. 80 years ago. This finally granted citizenship to most persons born on U.S. soil. My grandfather was born in 1919. His military service card from World War II listed him as Indian citizen because he participated in the war. It was 350 years ago, in 1628, the Puritans' first town was founded in Salem, a Massachusetts Bay colony. The people called themselves Puritans. They wanted to purify themselves from the Church of England. When the king punished them, the Puritans decided to go to North America. The Puritans set up a religious colony based on their religious belief and to practice religious freedom. They described us as wild savages that worshipped many gods. Yet they say we were a peaceful people. Isn't it ironic that their agony created the same prejudice that they fled from? In 1978, 350 years later, the American Indian Freedom of Religion Act was finally established. This act protected our rights so that we could exercise our traditional religion. In 1978, we finally had access to our sacred sites and to use and possess our sacred objects, and we finally had freedom to worship through our ceremonies and traditional rites, such as honoring the lunar calendar of 13 moons. It was 150 years ago. In 1870, Congress created the first federal holidays. Native Americans Day was proposed, and it was petitioned for many times since 1939, and it was introduced into Congress numerous times, but unfortunately it was unsuccessful. The proclamation only exists today as Native American Awareness Week. In 2020, 150 years later, here we are, celebrating with the boroughs of Swarthmore and Rutledge. And as a result of the compassion and hard work of fifth graders, past and present, of Miss Liz Corson, who proclaimed the Friday in September closest to the harvest moon as Indigenous Peoples Day. This holiday is not just any day. This day represents our religion and the celebration of the 13 moons. This day represents our harvest moon. We have survived the winters by planting the seeds and nourishing the plants and harvesting in the fruitfulness of our labor and blessings. This day represents the harvest of many years, our citizenship, our religion, and it pays tribute to us as the very next holiday. Little is known about the Lenape and the perils of our existence. We never speak about our hurt and our pain and how we have survived. We have stories from our elders, and we pass these stories from one generation to the next. Our story teaches us that the scales on the turtle's back has the pattern combination of numbers that define our lunar calendar cycle. The circles of the scales that surround the egg are 28, the number of days in a lunar month. There are 28 days from full moon to full moon. The center scales of the shell have a pattern of 13, and this represents the 13 moons of the lunar calendar year. And many turtles have come and gone, and our traditions and stories like this have survived. For many years, we survived as a remote community and remained a hidden people. We waited to be called upon, and we hear you calling us now. Our brothers and sisters were torn away from our homeland hundreds of years ago, and they are still a part of our lifeblood and our soil today. We are keeping this land and their seed. We have survived the winds of change many times. We changed with the influx of the first incursion in the 1500s, and again in the early 1600s, and finally in the 1700s, when in 1776, this country became a life of its own, nearly 250 years ago. By the time the English arrived, we were established with churches and schools that were already built earlier by the Swedes and the Finns, yet we remained a community of Lenape. We, as the Nanticoke Lenni-Lenape people, honor our gift of this land. We celebrate the bones of our ancestors. We protect the animals and the fish. We are still here, and our babies are still being born. We are living with our ancestors, and they are the keepers of this land. And we have survived thousands of years, and our blessings allowed us to remain a part of this landscape. They tried to erase us from history, yet history has been preserved through antiquity. They have recorded our tribal presence, not just in ancient communities, but our bones that are buried in and around this area. This amazing coincidence, this new holiday in 2020, is the momentum of change. This holiday honors our people, the Indigenous, especially the Nanticoke Lenni-Lenape, nearly 500 years later. And we are truly humbled by your call. We hear you, and we also invite you to our circle for a ceremonial round dance to celebrate our new journey. And we have all come